Welcome to my finance channel. Why does the world get rewritten again and again? Have you ever stopped to wonder why the reality we experience today will inevitably become unrecognizable to the generations of tomorrow, even though it strongly resembles the forgotten chapters of the past? We live our entire lives assuming that the ground beneath our feet is solid, that the money in our bank accounts holds intrinsic value, and that the laws governing our society are eternal truths. Yet, history whispers a complete different story. Whenever we look back across 500 years of human civilization, we see a relentless pattern of construction and destruction. The present moment is never a permanent destination. It is merely a fleeting transition between the collapse of an old paradigm and the violent birth of a new reality. Order is not a natural phenomenon grown from the earth. It is a meticulously designed system of control, forged in the fires of conflict and maintained by the threat of force. What exactly is an order? It is the invisible architecture of human interaction. A complex web spun from three distinct threads: absolute power, immutable rules, and a universally accepted currency system. Internal orders are dictated by constitutions and domestic laws, established after brutal civil wars or political revolutions where one class subjugates another. External orders, the global systems that dictate how sovereign nations interact, are written into international treaties only after the ash settles from devastating global conflicts. We often confuse peace with stability, but true order is simply maintained stability. It is a temporary equilibrium where the victors impose their will upon the vanquished. The financial systems, the trade agreements, and the borders are not eternal. They are the spoils of war. Philosophically, we must ask ourselves, is order a natural state of being or a highly artificial construct? The evidence suggests that every global system is heavily engineered by those who hold the reins of power. They write the rules to sustain their hegemony, creating a mechanism where capital and authority perpetually flow upward. However, this manufactured stability contains the seeds of its own destruction. Because order relies on the enforcement of rules rather than spontaneous harmony, it requires constant energy to maintain. When the cost of maintaining this illusion exceeds the wealth it generates, the foundation cracks. The system does not break by accident. It breaks because it is fundamentally designed to benefit the few at the unbearable expense of the many. Summary sentence: the order we trust is never permanent. It is a fragile illusion of maintained stability destined to collapse when the cost of power exceeds its returns. Chapter 2: The Circulation of Empires. To understand our current predicament, we must zoom out and observe the grand arc of history, a phenomenon we can call the cycle of empires. This cycle has repeated itself with mathematical precision, guiding the rise and fall of the Dutch Empire, the British Empire, and the American Empire. Each grand cycle lasts approximately 200 to 300 years, punctuated by agonizing transitional periods of 10 to 20 years, characterized by extreme volatility and conflict. No empire steps down willingly. The transfer of power is always a chaotic symphony of economic collapse and military confrontation. But how does a nation actually rise to global dominance? It is never accidental. It follows a strict, sequential path governed by the laws of economics and human ambition. The path to hegemony always begins with a surge in education and technological innovation. A well-educated populace creates new technologies, which radically increases national productivity. This productivity advantage allows the nation to dominate global trade. To protect these lucrative global trade routes, the nation must build an unstoppable military force. As the wealth from global trade accumulates, the nation inevitably develops the world's dominant financial center. Think of Amsterdam in the 17th century, London in the 19th century, and New York in the 20th century. Finally, because everyone wants to trade with this dominant power, the nation's currency becomes the global reserve currency. This is the ultimate crown of the empire, granting them the exorbitant privilege of borrowing endlessly and printing wealth out of thin air. However, this very crown is heavy with hubris, and it inevitably drags the empire into the abyss of its own arrogance. Psychologically, the success of the empire breeds a dangerous overconfidence. The generations born during the peak of prosperity have never known the brutal struggle of their ancestors. They become accustomed to luxury, valuing consumption over production and leisure over innovation. The empire begins to outsource its labor to cheaper, emerging nations, unwittingly transferring its technological secrets and productive capacity to its future rivals. The dominant power overextends itself militarily, fighting endless wars in distant lands to maintain a dying status quo. The cost of defending the empire eventually eclipses the revenue generated by the empire, transforming the once glorious hegemony into a hollow shell, collapsing under the weight of its own grandiosity. Summary sentence: every empire follows an inevitable trajectory from innovative production to decadent consumption, ultimately engineering its own downfall through imperial arrogance and financial overextension. Chapter 3: The Machinery of Debt. We must now uncover the darkest secret of the modern world. The economy is not a machine that generates wealth. It is a machine that generates debt. Have you ever considered that since the moment of your birth, you have been living inside an elaborately designed debt illusion? When the numbers of your mortgage, credit card bills, and consumer loans flash on your screen, you might believe you are participating in a growing economy. But the economy is not a gentle fluctuation described in textbooks. It is a bloody roller coaster driven entirely by borrowed capital. The most terrifying part is that you are currently sitting in the most dangerous downward plunge of this ride, and the brakes were removed by financial elites many decades ago. Imagine the entire nation as a giant kindergarten to understand this mechanism. There are only three roles. The children making Play-Doh are the producers. The children trading stickers for Play-Doh are the consumers. And the teacher distributing stickers is the central bank. Initially, 10 pieces of Play-Doh exchange for one sticker, which seems fair and balanced. But one day, the teacher decides to accelerate the game and allows the children to borrow tomorrow's stickers today. The children frantically borrow stickers, spending tomorrow's wealth today, creating a euphoric illusion where everyone has more stickers and more Play-Doh masterpieces. This phenomenon is called an economic boom, but it is fundamentally flawed because every debt is a vow that must be repaid with punishing interest. Psychologically, debt acts as a highly addictive narcotic. During the expansion phase, human greed overpowers rationality. People watch their neighbors getting rich by borrowing stickers to buy Play-Doh houses, and the fear of missing out drives them to take on even more leverage. They confuse the inflated price of the Play-Doh with actual intrinsic value, but eventually, the debt cycle reaches its zenith. The children realize they must repay more stickers than they can earn daily. They stop demanding. Play-Doh producers stop producing, and the indebted children desperately sell their assets to cover their loans. The teacher panics and prints vast amounts of new stickers, but the children do not want them to buy things. They only need them to service old debts. This debt spiral is known as deleveraging, a brutal awakening, where the future finally arrives to demand its stolen wealth back from the present. Summary sentence: the global economy is a predatory debt machine that fabricates temporary prosperity by cannibalizing the stolen productivity of our unborn future. Chapter 4: The Betrayal of Currency. The ultimate betrayal of the citizenry occurs within the monetary system itself. Throughout history, true currency was anchored to tangible reality, usually gold or silver. Paper money was merely a convenient claim check, a promise that you could walk into a bank and exchange your paper for real physical wealth. But what happens when a government becomes addicted to the debt machine? They inevitably spend far more than they earn, issuing countless paper checks without the gold to back them up. This is the exact scenario that unfolded in 1971. The United States had printed vast sums of dollars to fund wars and domestic welfare, far exceeding its gold reserves. As foreign nations began demanding their rightful gold, the illusion shattered. On a Sunday evening in August of 1971, President Richard Nixon appeared on television to commit the ultimate act of financial betrayal. He announced that the United States would temporarily suspend the convertibility of the dollar into gold. That temporary measure became permanent, and in that moment, the world was plunged into the era of fiat currency. Money was no longer a claim on tangible wealth. It became a concept backed by nothing but the promises of politicians and the violence of the state. Without the golden fetters to restrain them, central banks acquired the godlike power to print infinite amounts of currency. But printing money does not magically create factories, technologies, or commodities. It simply dilutes the value of every existing unit of currency already in circulation. This mechanism explains the bizarre phenomena we witnessed during the crisis of 2008 and 2020. When the economy grinds to a halt, central banks flood the system with trillions of newly printed notes. The masses rejoice, believing the government is saving them. But watch carefully where that money flows. It does not trickle down to the working class. It surges directly into financial assets. The stock market soars, real estate prices explode, and the wealthy elites who own these assets see their net worth multiply. Meanwhile, the ordinary worker watches the price of food, energy, and shelter skyrocket while their wages remain stagnant. Printing money is not an act of economic rescue. It is a stealth tax, a malicious algorithm designed to systematically siphon the purchasing power of labor and transfer it directly into the vaults of capital. Summary sentence: fiat currency is the ultimate instrument of exploitation, allowing the powerful to print away their debts while silently confiscating the life energy of the working class. Chapter 5: The Symphony of Collapse. How do we know when an order is inevitably reaching its terminal decline? The universe seldom leaves us without warning signs. Through rigorous historical analysis, we can identify three massive, converging conflicts that signal the death knell of an era. First, we see an insurmountable financial crisis caused by debt reaching mathematical limits. When a nation can no longer generate enough organic growth to even pay the interest on its national debt, it enters a terminal state. The central bank is forced to print money just to keep the government operating, accelerating the destruction of the currency's purchasing power. Debt transforms from an engine of growth into an anchor, dragging the entire society into the abyss. Second, this financial deterioration breeds devastating internal conflict. As the central bank prints money to rescue the elites, the chasm between the ultra-rich and the working poor expands into a bottomless canyon. This is not merely an economic issue. It is a psychological powder keg. The working class realizes the game is rigged. Resentment boils over into political extremism, populism, and severe polarization. The left demands radical wealth redistribution through punitive taxation, while the right demands the violent defense of existing property rights. The internal fabric of society tears apart, and citizens begin viewing their neighbors not as compatriots, but as existential enemies. A nation consumed by internal hatred cannot possibly defend its hegemony on the global stage. Third, we witness the escalation of external conflict. As the dominant power weeds internally under the crushing weight of debt and social division, emerging powers smell blood. In the water, they realize the hegemony is weak, overextended, and distracted. They begin to challenge the existing global rules, demanding a larger share of resource allocation and geopolitical influence. This leads to trade wars, technology embargoes, and the unmistakable drumbeats of military confrontation. When the financial crisis, the internal social fracture, and the external geopolitical challenge converge at the exact same point in time, the existing order cannot survive. It is a mathematical and historical certainty that the system will collapse under this trinity of catastrophes. Summary sentence: when exploding debt, extreme domestic inequality, and fierce international rivalry collide, the current world order is mathematically condemned to total collapse. Chapter 6: The Great Wealth Reset. When the old order finally crumbles, it does not result in the end of the world, but rather a brutal and meticulously orchestrated reallocation of wealth. History shows that all major institutional crises are fundamentally a ritual of wealth distribution. The crisis is not a mistake. It is the mechanism operating exactly as designed. The first stage of this macabre ritual is the asset price collapse. The stock market plunges by 70%, real estate values evaporate, and panic sweeps through the general public. Driven by primal fear, ordinary people frantically liquidate their tangible investments, converting everything into cash and hiding it in banks, desperately hoping to preserve what little they have left. But they are tragically unaware that stage 2 is already upon them. The second stage is systemic currency devaluation. The authorities, drowning in unpayable debts, suddenly alter the rules of reality. They render the old currency worthless, establishing a new exchange rate out of thin air, or simply inflating the supply so massively that purchasing power plummets to zero. Consider Weimar, Germany, in 1923, or Zimbabwe in recent memory. A citizen who diligently saved 10,000 currency units might find it bills a mere loaf of bread. Crucially, the elites and the government who out billions now repay their debts with this worthless paper. This dark magic is called debt monetization. Your bank balance number might not change a single digit, but its ability to purchase survival drops to 1%. Then comes the final, most ruthless stage, the asset reset. The powerful elites, who quietly hedged their wealth in hard assets or foreign currencies before the crash, now re-enter the devastated market. Armed with capital that retained its value, they sweep up the real wealth of the nation at pennies on the dollar. They buy the bankrupt factories, the foreclosed land, the oil wells, and the patented technologies. By the time the dust settles and the ordinary citizens awaken from the nightmare, all high-quality assets have completely changed hands. The entire process resembles a carefully choreographed stage play where the masses cry in despair on stage, while the directors calculate their monumental box office profits below. Summary sentence: a financial collapse is never an accident. It is a calculated wealth harvesting ritual where the tangible assets of the ignorant are transferred to the prepared. Chapter 7: The Slaughter of the Ordinary. Why do the masses repeatedly fall victim to this brutal cycle? Why do the same people pay the price century after century? It is because the system is engineered to exploit the psychological vulnerabilities of the ordinary person. The middle class is particularly susceptible to total annihilation during these resets because they misunderstand the fundamental nature of wealth. They believe wealth is the salary they earn and the fiat currency they save in the bank. They do not realize that their wages are deliberately designed to never outpace asset inflation. When you work for a salary, you are trading non-renewable time for an infinitely printable currency. It is a game you cannot possibly win because the central bank can dilute the value of your life's labor with a single keystroke. The tragedy of the ordinary person is deeply rooted in human psychology, specifically the herd mentality. In the information age, ignorance is no longer a lack of data. It is an active, willful choice. People prefer the comfort of consensus over the cold, harsh reality of macroeconomic indicators. During the boom phase, they suffer from uncontrollable greed, taking on massive the very peak of the market because everyone else is doing it. When the crash arrives, they are paralyzed by irrational fear, selling their depleted assets at the absolute bottom just to escape the psychological pain. They are consistently out of phase with the reality of the cycle, acting upon emotion while the elites act upon mathematical formulas. Most crucially, the ordinary citizen represents the shock absorber of the entire capitalist apparatus. When the financial elites make reckless gambles and fail, the system must be bailed out to prevent total annihilation. Who pays for this bailout? It is never the elite. It is the taxpayer. The government prints trillions, driving up inflation, which quietly steals the groceries from the tables of the poor and the savings from the accounts of the middle class. The elites retain their mansions and stock portfolios, while the ordinary person is left holding the ashes of their diluted currency. The system does not malfunction when it crushes the middle class. It is performing its essential function of socializing risk and privatizing profit. Summary sentence: the ordinary citizen is consistently slaughtered by the system because they trade their real labor for fake money and let contagious emotions dictate their financial destiny. Chapter 8: The Architecture of Survival. How can a rational individual survive when the historical tides turn, the world order fractures, and the financial heavens fall? You cannot stop the great cycle anymore. Then you can stop the winter from freezing the lakes, but you can master the architecture of survival. The first imperative is to drastically alter your relationship with value. You must transform your fragile paper wealth into tangible, immutable entities. You must shift away from a vulnerable dependency on a single fiat currency and embrace a highly diversified portfolio, spanning hard assets, global equities, and commodities. Most importantly, you must viciously strip away excessive debt before the tides recede, ensuring that your survival is not dependent on the mercy of a bank's margin call. A true survivor builds their ark long before the sky turns dark. You must abandon the delusional narratives peddled by social media and establish your own dashboard of hard economic indicators. Track the growth of the money supply, real inflation rates, and global debt yields. Conduct ruthless stress tests on your own existence. Imagine waking up tomorrow to find your salary slashed by half, your currency devalued by 60%, and your mortgage interest doubled. If that scenario would destroy your family, you are sleeping in a house made of gunpowder. You must prioritize unshakable cash flow over speculative capital gains in a depression. The entity with positive cash flow is the predator. The entity drowning in debt is the prey. Finally, in the midst of chaos, the ultimate hard currency is not gold or Bitcoin. It is unmatched cognitive capability. When the rules of society are rewritten, the old credentials become meaningless. Technical adaptability, deep problem solving, and emotional stoicism will become the scarcest resources on earth. You must elevate your cognition above the panicking herd. While others cower in fear at the destruction of the old world, you must coldly analyze where the capital is flowing next. Survival is not about accurately predicting the future. It is about building a personal fortress so resilient that it can absorb the shocks of any possible future. Summary sentence: true survival requires stripping away lethal debt, acquiring hard assets, and forging a stoic mindset capable of navigating the chaotic transition of global power. We now return to the profound question that began our journey. Why does the world get rewritten again and again? We have discovered that it is not due to random tragedy, but a calculated cycle of human nature, debt mechanisms, and the relentless pursuit of absolute power. History proves that the economy is rarely a mechanism for human flourishing. It is consistently wielded as a tool for systemic control. Yet within this brutal cycle lies a hidden philosophical mercy. If destruction is inevitable, so too is rebirth. The winter of collapse always yields to the spring of a new order. The question is, No longer what the system will do to you, but how you will position yourself to survive it. Will you allow your wealth to be harvested by the architects of the next order? Or will you elevate your cognition to break free from the herd? If this deep dive into the mechanisms of reality resonated with you, please subscribe to my channel and join our community of rational thinkers. I will leave you with one final, disturbing thought to ponder tonight. If the money in your pocket is constantly losing value by design, who is secretly collecting the wealth you are losing?